They thought we were an easy target. A fake HOA, a few trucks, and a group of neighbors who figured they could push us around without consequence. But the truth is, they underestimated just how far they were pushing and who they were pushing against. Let me back this up. Our neighborhood was nothing fancy, but it was ours. Families had lived here for years, raising kids, grilling on weekends, waving at each other from across the street. People minded their own business, and that's how I liked it. But then Maribel moved in. And everything started to change. Mara wasn't just another neighbor. She carried herself like she owned the whole block. Loud voice, sharp eyes, the kind of person who thrived on control. Within weeks of settling in, she started talking about standards, about rules, about keeping the neighborhood respectable. It sounded harmless at first. Who doesn't want a nice neighborhood? But her idea of respectable was less about community and more about power. It started small. One day, a slip of paper showed up in my mailbox. Looked halfway official, stamped with HOA enforcement in block letters. It claimed I was in violation because my mailbox didn't meet community standards. The fine, $200. I laughed. There was no HOA here. I had checked before buying the house, no binding covenants, no association fees, nothing like that. Still, the paper looked real enough that I could imagine other neighbors falling for it. I tore it up and tossed it. A week later, another slip arrived. This one said my truck, parked in my own driveway, was non-compliant. The fine, $500. Then came a third slip, this one for unauthorized modifications. My crime? Installing solar panels on the roof. Fine, $1,000. By then, I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. I started asking around. Other neighbors had gotten the same notes. Some had even paid. Mara and her little crew, two guys she seemed to keep around like bodyguards, were printing fake citations, stuffing them in mailboxes, and pretending they had authority. And the sad part? Enough people were intimidated to cough up cash. I wasn't one of them. One evening, I walked right up to Mara's house, note in hand. She was standing out front watering her flower beds, acting like the queen of the block. Funny thing, I said, holding up the slip. There's no record of a homeowners association here. County clerk's office has nothing. Which means this little fine of yours isn't worth the paper it's printed on. Her eyes narrowed, and for a split second, the mask slipped. Then she smirked. You either play by our rules, she said, or we'll make your life miserable. That was the moment everything shifted. This wasn't about money. It was about power. Mara wasn't satisfied with running her own home, she wanted to run everyone else's too. And she was willing to bend the law, or outright break it, to get what she wanted. I walked away that night with my jaw tight, heart pounding. It wasn't fear. It was anger. Because I knew people like Mara. I'd dealt with them before. Bullies in uniform, bullies without one, it didn't matter. They all thrived on intimidation. And the only thing that ever stopped them was someone standing up and saying, not here. Not today. The problem was, Mara wasn't just a loudmouth neighbor. She had built a little following. Derek, her right-hand man, was a big guy with a shaved head, the type who enjoyed throwing his weight around. His partner, smaller but meaner, seemed to take pleasure in destruction. Together, they gave Mara's so-called HOA muscle. They started walking the neighborhood like they owned it, wearing black vests with HOA stenciled across the front in cheap paint, as if a Spraykin logo could make them official. Neighbors whispered but stayed quiet. A few raised concerns, but most just paid up to avoid trouble. And that was exactly how Mara liked it, silence bought with fear. But here's the thing about fear, it doesn't work on everyone. It didn't work on me. And it sure as hell didn't work on my son. After that night with Mara, I couldn't shake her words, play by our rules, or we'll make your life miserable. Most people might have shrugged it off, hoping she'd lose interest. But I've lived long enough and served long enough to know that bullies never stop on their own. They only grow bolder if you let them. So I did what I always do when faced with a threat. I gathered intel. The next morning, I drove down to the county clerk's office. It wasn't a quick trip, but it was worth it. I asked for every scrap of documentation tied to our subdivision, CC and RS, bylaws, HOA registrations. Anything that would prove whether Mara had a legal leg to stand on. The clerk was polite, flipping through digital records, cross-checking addresses. After 15 minutes, she looked up and shook her head. "There's nothing," she said. "This neighborhood has no active homeowners association. No record, no filings. Just individual property deeds." That confirmed what I already suspected. Mara's so-called HOA was nothing but smoke and mirrors. But it also meant something more dangerous. Everything she was doing was flat out illegal. I walked out with copies of property maps and official letters, proof that no HOA existed. The weight of those papers felt heavier than they should have. Because I knew once Mara realized I wasn't going to play along, she'd escalate. And I was right. By the end of that week, her fake citations doubled. They weren't even subtle anymore. Bright orange slips slapped on my garage door, written in all caps, screaming about final notices and condemnation orders. Neighbors whispered as they walked past, glancing at the papers and then at me, unsure what to believe. The intimidation worked on some of them. I noticed a few houses suddenly repainting their fences, ripping up flower beds, even removing sheds. People were complying, not because they believed in Mara's authority, but because they feared her retaliation. That's how control works. Not through legitimacy, but through fear. I wasn't having it. I kept every slip, documenting dates, photos, even fingerprints when I could. My military training drilled into me that documentation wins battles just as much as weapons do. Evidence is armor in a legal fight, and I was collecting plenty. Still, I couldn't ignore the way Mara looked at me when we crossed paths. Cold eyes, sharp grin. Like she knew she couldn't find me into submission, but she could make me bend another way. That's when I realized this wasn't just about fake tickets or money grabs anymore. Mara wanted control of the entire block, and I had become the obstacle. Lisa, my wife, told me I was overthinking it. "She's just a nosy neighbor with too much time," she said. But even she admitted the pace was picking up. Every week, the fake HOA got bolder. And the neighbors, they were watching me as much as they were watching her. Some looked at me like I was their hope, the one who might finally put a stop to it. Others looked at me with caution, like they were waiting to see if I'd fold before deciding what side to be on. That's the worst part of neighborhood disputes, it doesn't stay between two houses. It pulls everyone in, one way or another. But through all of it, one thing gave me peace of mind: Cole. My son might have been only 16, but he wasn't like other kids his age. While others spent hours glued to screens, Cole trained with me. He learned discipline, respect, and patience. I'd taught him firearm safety, situational awareness, and the importance of staying calm when things went sideways. He didn't just understand responsibility, he lived it. I wasn't reckless with that kind of teaching. Every firearm in my house was legally owned, safely stored, and handled with respect. Cole didn't treat it like a toy or a video game. He treated it like what it was, a last resort tool to defend what mattered. And deep down, I knew that if Mara and her crew ever crossed the line from intimidation to action, Cole would be ready. Not because he was itching for a fight, but because he understood something most grown men don't: when you're defending your home, hesitation can cost everything. At that point, I didn't know exactly how far Mara was willing to go. But I could feel it building. Every new find, every new slip of paper, every smug glance, each one was a test, pushing boundaries to see how much she could get away with. And when people like Mara get desperate, they don't just stop at paper threats. They escalate. And soon enough, that escalation would arrive with the roar of engines and the crash of metal against my garage door. By now, it was clear, Mara wasn't just a nosy neighbor with too much time. She was dangerous. Her little group was gaining confidence with every fake citation, every neighbor who gave in. And when intimidation works, people like her only push harder. But in my house, fear didn't live here. Preparation did. I wasn't some rookie homeowner learning the ropes. I had served in the army, and one thing the service drilled into me was this: order and readiness win the fight long before the first shot is fired. You don't wait until trouble kicks down your door to start thinking about what to do. You plan. You prepare. You rehearse. And I had prepared my family for years. See, I didn't raise Cole to be soft. I raised him to be strong, disciplined, and capable of standing on his own 2 feet. At 16, he wasn't just another teenager glued to a screen or wasting hours scrolling through his phone. He was focused. Cole knew how to handle pressure. I started him young, teaching him responsibility before freedom. His chores weren't just about cleaning the yard or mowing the lawn, they were about discipline. His sports weren't just about burning energy, they were about learning composure under stress. And when it came to firearms, I made sure he understood one truth above all: weapons demand respect. Every rifle, pistol, and shotgun in my home was legally owned, secured, and locked away. I never treated them as toys, and I sure didn't raise my son to either. By the time he was 12, Cole could break down and clean an AR-15 blindfolded. By 14, he could shoot tighter groups at the range than most grown men I had served with. But the skill wasn't what mattered most, it was the mindset. Calm. Steady. Never reckless. I remember him asking me once, "Dad, why do I need to learn all this?" Because, I told him, you don't wait for trouble to learn how to handle it. You learn now, so if the day ever comes, you're ready. That answer stuck with him. You could see it in the way he carried himself, quiet confidence, not bravado. Lisa, my wife, sometimes worried I was being too hard on him. "He's just a kid," she'd say. And she was right, he was still young. But I always believed the world doesn't care about your age when trouble comes knocking. It only cares if you're ready. And Cole was ready. That weekend, Lisa and I had to travel out of state on business. Nothing major, just a couple of days. We debated taking Cole with us, but in the end, he insisted he could handle things at home. Independent, mature, and more responsible than most kids twice his age, I trusted him. Before leaving, I went over the basics one more time. Keep the doors locked. Don't answer for anyone you don't know. If something feels wrong, call the sheriff's office immediately. And if, God forbid, someone tries to come through that door, you know where the duffel bag is. The duffel. It wasn't something I ever wanted him to open. Inside was a level 3 plate carrier, gloves, spare mags, and my semi-automatic AK-74. Everything legal, registered, and secured. I told him plainly, this bag is not for practice. It's not for show. It's only for when the fight comes to our door. And if that day ever comes, you'll know. Cole nodded. He didn't argue, didn't roll his eyes like most teens might. He understood. That was enough for me. Lisa kissed him goodbye, her worry written all over her face. But I could see in Cole's eyes something steadier, resolve. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't scared. He was ready. We drove away thinking at worst he'd find another bogus citation taped to the garage by the time we got back. Maybe a threatening note from Mara, maybe some trash in the yard. What we didn't know was that Mara had already decided notes weren't enough. She wanted more than compliance. She wanted domination. And that Saturday night, she was going to send her crew to prove it. Cole didn't know it yet, but the duffel bag wasn't going to stay zipped much longer. Saturday night started quiet. Cole was upstairs, headphones in, half focused on homework, half listening for the familiar creaks of the house. Outside, the street was still. Porch lights flickered on here and there as neighbors settled in for the night. To anyone else, it was just another calm evening in suburbia. But calm has a way of breaking fast. Around 10 p.m., Cole heard it, the low growl of engines rolling slow, then revving hard. He muted his laptop, stood by the window, and peered through the blinds. 2 trucks crept down the street, their headlights off until they reached our driveway. Then the beams flared bright, cutting across the garage door like a spotlight. Engines snarled louder, like beasts pawing the ground before the charge. Cole's stomach tightened. He knew. This wasn't just a late-night joyride or some drunk neighbors fooling around. This was deliberate. He flicked off the lights upstairs, keeping himself in shadow, and crouched low to watch. The first truck lurched forward. Tires screeched, engine roared, and then, impact. Crash! The front bumper smashed into the garage door with bone-rattling force. Metal screamed as it buckled inward, panels folding like tin foil. Drywall dust burst into the air inside, sifting down like smoke. The impact rattled window frames across the block. Neighbors stirred. Porch lights blinked on. Blinds shifted. Phones began to appear in shaking hands. The truck reversed, then revved again, ready for another hit. The sound echoed like thunder. Cole's heart pounded, but he stayed calm. His father's words trilled into him, "Stay steady. Think before you move." From the first truck, a man climbed out, Derek. Broad shoulders, shaved head, fake vest with HOA stenciled across the chest in sloppy white paint. A crowbar dangled in one hand, clipboard in the other, like this was all just routine business. His partner jumped out of the second truck, shorter but meaner looking. He grinned wide as he circled toward the side of the house, dragging his crowbar along the siding. The screech of metal on wood made Cole grit his teeth. Each scrape left deep scars on the wall, jagged and cruel. "Final notice," Derek barked, loud enough for half the street to hear. "Garage in violation. Property condemned." It sounded almost official, if you ignored the trucks and the wreckage of the garage door. Cole heard laughter. Not the light kind. Ugly, sharp, triumphant. The kind that said, "We own this place now." Neighbors froze in doorways. Some recorded, but no one stepped in. Everyone knew Mara's crew had been getting bolder. And everyone knew Mara liked to make examples. Inside, Cole's pulse hammered in his ears. He could stay hidden. He could call the sheriff and pray they arrived before the next crash. But the house was already under attack. The line had already been crossed. That's when he remembered the duffel. Moving with purpose, he slid open the closet. Hands steady, he unzipped it. The faint metallic rattle greeted him like an old friend. He strapped on the level 3 plate carrier, adjusting the shoulder straps until they fit snug. He pulled on gloves, flexing his fingers once. Then he lifted the AK-74, checking the chamber clear before sliding the magazine home with a clean, practiced motion. The click echoed in the quiet upstairs room. He wasn't chasing violence. He was defending his home. Outside, Derek's partner shouted, voice dripping with mockery. "Get out here, kid. Tell your daddy his little shed cost him everything." He slammed the crowbar into the side door, splitting wood with each hit. Cole's breath steadied. He wasn't most kids. He was ready. With boots silent on the stairs, he descended to the porch. He stepped out into the night air, lit by the harsh beams of truck headlights and the glow of neighbors' phones. 16 years old, but standing like a man who had trained his whole life for this moment. The rifle angled down. Finger straight. Voice level. "This is private property," Cole called out, his words sharp as steel. "You've already committed felony destruction of property. Leave now before you add more charges to the list." The laughter faltered. Derek turned, smirk spreading across his face as he squinted at the boy in armor. "Or what? You'll call the cops, kid?" "We are the cops." But Cole didn't blink. Didn't flinch. He shifted his stance, lifted the rifle just enough, and prepared to make his next move. The night had stopped being quiet. Now, it was about to explode. For a moment, the street held its breath. The trucks idled, headlights flooding the yard in harsh white beams. The shattered garage door sagged inward, twisted like a crushed can. Dust still floated in the air. Neighbors clustered behind their blinds or frozen on their porches, cell phones recording every second but no one daring to step closer. And in the middle of it all stood Cole, 16 years old, body armor strapped tight, the AK-74 leveled just enough to show he knew exactly what he was doing. Derek smirked, swaggering forward with his crowbar. "Look at this," he said loudly, laughing as if to keep control of the show. "Kid thinks he's in Afghanistan. You know what happens when children play soldier? They get hurt." The second man joined in, circling wide, trying to flank. His boots crunched across the gravel as he tapped the crowbar against his palm. "Come on, boy. Put Daddy's toy down before you break something." Cole's voice cut through the night, steady, practiced, the way his father had drilled into him. "Project strength, don't yell, speak like you're already in charge. You've got 10 seconds to leave this property. You're trespassing, you've destroyed private property, and this is your final warning." Derek stopped laughing. He tilted his head, sneer tightening. "Final warning? You got no badge, no authority. You're just a scared little punk hiding behind a gun." Cole didn't blink. His finger rested outside the trigger guard, his stance wide and balanced. Every lesson from the range, every drill with his father, lived in that posture. He wasn't bluffing. 5 seconds passed. The shorter thug spat into the grass. "He ain't gonna do nothin', Dot." The second truck revved suddenly, tires squealing as the driver inched it forward, bumper grinding against what was left of the garage door. Metal shrieked, siding cracked. The sound was a taunt, a dare. That was the breaking point. Cole exhaled, deep and calm, and raised the AK-74 skyward. The muzzle lifted in one smooth motion. Crack! The shot shattered the night like a thunderclap. Neighbors screamed. Lights flicked on up and down the block. Dogs barked frantically. The round tore into the air, harmless but unmistakable, echoing across rooftops like a siren announcing, "The game just changed." Cole lowered the rifle back to ready position, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "That was your warning. Next one's not going in the air." The effect was instant. The smirk drained from Derek's face. His eyes darted between Cole, the weapon, and the cluster of cell phones glowing across the street. This wasn't the script he'd planned. He'd expected fear, doors locking, neighbors hiding. Not a 16-year-old in body armor, weapon trained, stance unshakable, half the neighborhood capturing every second. The shorter thug shifted uneasily, grip on his crowbar loosening. He muttered, "Man, this is bad. Cameras everywhere. That shot's gonna bring cops." For the first time, doubt crept into Derek's voice. "Relax," he snapped, but it sounded more like he was talking to himself than giving orders. The truck's engines growled nervously as the drivers hesitated. The whole street buzzed with tension, like electricity building before a storm. Cole didn't move. Didn't waver. He looked each man in the eye, steady, unafraid. 16 years old, but in that moment, he carried himself like a soldier guarding his post. "You wanted a show of power?" Cole said, tone even. "Here it is. This house is protected. This family is protected. Take one more step and you'll find out the hard way." The crowbars stopped swinging. The bravado slipped. For the first time since Mara's little empire began, her soldiers weren't laughing. In the distance, faint but growing, came the sound Cole had been waiting for, sirens. Blue and red lights flickered against the horizon. Cole tightened his stance, fingers still disciplined off the trigger, eyes locked on the intruders. He hadn't come out here to kill anyone. He'd come out to prove that his home wasn't defenseless. And in that moment, he had done exactly that. The night wasn't over, but the balance of power had shifted. The sound of sirens grew louder, cutting through the tension like a blade. What had started as distant wails now roared closer, echoing down the narrow streets of our subdivision. Blue and red lights splashed against houses, flickering across stucco walls and front lawns like firelight. Cole didn't flinch. He stood firm on the porch, rifle angled down but ready, his body armor catching the pulsing glow as the cruisers screeched to a stop in the driveway. Two sheriff's deputies poured out of their vehicles. Their boots hit the pavement hard, hands resting on holstered pistols, eyes darting across the wreckage, the smashed garage door, the revving trucks, the armed teenager standing tall at the center of the chaos. Sheriff's Department, one deputy barked, his voice carrying over the idling engines. Everyone freeze. Hands where we can see them. The order cut through the night. Derek, suddenly pale, dropped his crowbar to the ground with a clatter. His partner hesitated, but the sight of two deputies advancing with professional precision was enough to make him toss his own weapon aside. The drivers in the trucks killed their engines, fear settling in like a cold fog. Cole obeyed instantly, lowering the rifle and placing it across his chest, fingers still well away from the trigger. His stance was disciplined, controlled, exactly the way his father had drilled into him. He spoke calmly, voice clear and respectful. "Deputies, I'm the homeowner's son. These men smashed through our garage and threatened me. The weapon is registered and secured. I haven't harmed anyone." The deputies glanced at one another, assessing. They saw what the neighbors had seen, not a reckless kid, but someone trained, composed, and justified in his defense. Meanwhile, Derek tried to regain control. He raised his hands, stammering, This is a misunderstanding. We're with the HOA. This is legal enforcement action." One deputy's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. "You're what?" "Homeowners Association Enforcement," Derek repeated, voice cracking under the weight of the flashing lights and cell phone cameras aimed at him from half the block. "We're authorized to carry out." The deputy cut him off, his tone sharp as steel. "There is no legally registered HOA here. And impersonating officials? That's a felony." The words hit like a hammer. Derek's mouth fell open. His partner muttered something incoherent, shaking his head. The deputies advanced, their flashlights cutting across the scene. "You," the taller deputy barked, pointing at Derek. "Step forward. Hands on your head." Derek complied, stumbling slightly as he was spun around, wrists yanked back, cuffs clicking tight. His partner followed, dropping to his knees with hands raised before the deputy even reached him. The neighborhood watched in silence, broken only by the hum of radios and the scribble of pens as deputies took statements. Cameras rolled, recording every second, the arrests, the fake vests, the crowbars tossed in the grass. Mara's little empire wasn't just unraveling, it was collapsing in full public view. Cole stood back, rifle now slung safely across his chest. One of the deputies approached him, voice steady but respectful. "Son, you handled yourself well. You didn't escalate, and you gave us something solid to work with. You've got discipline most adults don't." Cole nodded once. "My dad taught me. I just did what I had to do." The deputy gave a faint smile, then gestured toward the wrecked garage. "You and your family will want to file a full report. Property damage, harassment, impersonation, we'll make sure every charge sticks." By the time the cuffs clicked shut and the suspects were loaded into the back of the cruisers, the neighborhood had transformed. Fear turned into vindication. Neighbors stepped off porches, murmuring support, some clapping quietly as the patrol cars pulled away. Mara's enforcers, her so-called HOA muscle, were gone, hauled off under the glow of flashing lights. And for the first time in months, the street didn't feel suffocated by intimidation. Cole finally let himself breathe. His shoulders sagged as adrenaline drained away, but his eyes still carried the sharpness of someone who'd stared danger down and refused to break. He had defended his home, and now the law was here to finish what he had started. The night had begun with violence, but it ended with justice. And Marabelle's kingdom of fear had just taken its first, crushing blow. By the time Lisa and I pulled into the driveway that evening, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. The garage door was mangled beyond recognition, tilted inward like a broken jaw. Splintered wood and twisted steel littered the driveway. For a moment, my stomach dropped. Then I saw Cole, standing calmly near the porch, arms crossed, a quiet strength about him. Two sheriff's cruisers still sat at the curb, lights flashing, their presence both comforting and surreal. Deputies were talking to neighbors, collecting phone footage, taking statements. Mara's men were long gone, cuffed and hauled to the county jail. Lisa rushed to Cole, hugging him so tight he finally let out a tired laugh. "I'm fine, Mom," he said, though his voice betrayed the exhaustion of someone who had carried far more than his share of the weight. One of the deputies walked over to me, flipping open a notepad. "You're the homeowner?" "Yes, sir." He gave me a firm nod. "Your boy here handled himself better than most adults I've seen in situations like this. Kept it controlled, de-escalated with a warning shot, and waited for us to arrive. He's a solid young man." I glanced at Cole, pride welling in my chest. He's been raised to be responsible. He knew what was at stake. The deputy scribbled a few notes before continuing. "We'll file charges against the two individuals we arrested tonight. Felony criminal mischief for the damage to your garage, trespassing, and, most importantly, impersonating officials. That's serious time. Mara Bell's name keeps coming up, and we'll be pursuing her part in this as well." I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me. But my mind was already racing toward the next step, restitution. "What about damages?" The deputy nodded. "You'll want to file a civil suit. Document everything, repairs, receipts, medical if needed, emotional distress. With the video evidence your neighbors captured, you've got an airtight case." After the deputies wrapped up their report, neighbors began trickling over. People I'd barely spoken to before stopped by, offering footage, eyewitness accounts, even offers to help patch the garage until repairs could be made. The same folks who had once whispered about Mara's so-called authority were now emboldened, rallying around us. Inside, Lisa brewed coffee while Cole sat at the table, posture finally softening as the weight lifted from his shoulders. I spread a legal pad across the counter, jotting down every detail I could remember from the past months, the fake fines, the threats, the violation slips shoved into mailboxes. I pulled out the stack of bogus citations Mara had issued us, $200 for a mailbox, $500 for a truck in the driveway, $1,000 for solar panels. None of it legal, but all of it part of her campaign to wear us down. Now it was ammunition. "Dad," Cole said quietly, "you're not gonna just let this slide, right?" I looked at him, meeting his steady gaze. "Not a chance. They smashed our property, threatened our family, and terrorized this neighborhood. They're going to pay for every bit of it, in court." Lisa nodded firmly. It's time someone finally stood up to her, not just on the street, but on paper where it counts. We spent the rest of the night gathering evidence. Photos of the damage, notes from neighbors, saved messages, every shred of proof that Mara's HOA had never been legitimate. By the time the clock struck midnight, a thick binder sat on the table, ready to be handed over to our attorney. The fight had shifted. No longer just intimidation, no longer just crowbars and trucks. Now it was going to be about the law, the real law, not the counterfeit authority Mara had been peddling. And in a court of law, she didn't stand a chance. That night, as I stood in front of the wrecked garage with Cole on my side, I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did good, son. Better than I could have hoped." He shrugged, trying to play it off, but there was pride in his eyes. "I just did what had to be done." The truth was, he had done more than that. He had drawn a line, and for the first time, Mara's empire had crumbled against it. The lawsuit would finish the job. By the end of the week, our neighborhood no longer looked the same. The twisted garage door had been hauled away, replaced temporarily with plywood and heavy locks, but the real change wasn't in the house, it was in the air. The fear that once clung to every porch light, every whispered conversation about Mara Bell, had begun to lift. The deputies kept their word. Within days, Mara was formally charged alongside Derek and his crew. Trespassing, criminal mischief, impersonating officials. The list went on. Each charge stacked higher than the last, and each carried weight she could no longer bluff her way through. But she didn't go down quietly. On the third night after the incident, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mara's voice exploded through the receiver, sharp and venomous. "You think this is over? You think your little soldier boy won? Drop the charges, or I swear you'll regret it." Her words came fast, almost panicked, like a cornered animal lashing out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "The law doesn't negotiate with imposters, Mara," I said evenly. "This isn't your playground anymore. It's over." I hung up before she could reply. The next morning, I filed a restraining order. Our attorney moved quickly, building the civil case on the mountain of evidence we compiled. Every bogus citation Mara had written, every fake fine she had tried to collect, every neighbor she had threatened, it all became part of the record. With the video footage of the garage incident going viral online, her credibility was shredded before she even stepped into a courtroom. Neighbors who had once cowered now stepped forward with stories of their own. One family described being fined for their kid's basketball hoop. Another for painting their front door the wrong shade of blue. The fraudulent HOA hadn't just targeted us, it had poisoned the entire block. And now, people were ready to speak. Cole stayed quiet through most of it, but I could see the weight on him. He had done something most kids his age couldn't even imagine, facing down grown men with nothing but his training, his courage, and his discipline. He didn't brag about it. He didn't gloat. But when a neighbor clapped him on the back and called him the reason we're free of her, I caught the smallest flicker of pride cross his face. By the time the civil case reached its first hearing, Mara's authority was nothing but ashes. The county clerk confirmed what I had already known from day one: no HOA had ever been registered here. Her so-called enforcement body was a sham, a fantasy she had cooked up to seize power. The judge didn't mince words. This court finds that the defendants knowingly engaged in fraudulent activity, harassment, and the destruction of private property. Restitution will be paid in full. $8,500 in property damage. Thousands more in punitive damages and legal fees. And perhaps most satisfying of all, a permanent injunction banning Mara Bell from ever attempting to enforce authority in our neighborhood again. When the gavel fell, the room erupted, not in cheers, but in a collective sigh of relief. The rain was finally over. Weeks later, the new garage door was installed, stronger than the last. The siding was repaired, the driveway swept clean. Life began to look normal again, but it wasn't the same normal as before. It was freer. Lighter. I stood out front one evening, watching Cole toss a ball with a friend in the yard, laughter carrying down the block. For the first time in months, the street sounded like a neighborhood, not a war zone. Lisa came out beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "Feels good, doesn't it?" she said softly. "Better than good," I replied, eyes on Cole. "It feels like we've got our home back." And we did. Mara's empire had crumbled. The fake HOA was toast. And in its place stood something stronger, a community no longer willing to be bullied, a family no longer living under threat, and a 16-year-old who had proven, when the moment came, that he could hold the line. The fight was over. The lesson was clear. Power built on lies never lasts.